Hello, if you were looking for a scare tonight, you've come to the right place. I'll be narrating an hour's worth of creepy horror stories that I found off of Reddit. So without further ado,
These are their stories.
When the edged wind came to our village, it seemed like a typical Alaskan gust, one fitting for late December. Then, as the tall tide of frost lashed against the shore of our home, the sagging branches of the yellow cedar tree stopped bouncing, and I abandoned the idea of the breeze being a breeze at all. Once others understood that, the time for running had passed. The unholy wind reached the village's main road, causing two moving cars to sharply and statically stop. The vehicles were frozen in place, much like the people within those metal graves. Onlookers enjoying a brisk afternoon in the park began to scream as loved ones succumbed to that supernatural end, imprisoned in a capsuled moment of time. Those first few victims were the lucky ones. They'd been oblivious to the fate which awaited them. True terror was endured by those who beheld the raw power of the wind. Those unfortunate enough to see the end coming, regardless, the remaining townsfolk, burdened with the awareness of impending doom, futilely attempted to escape the approaching breeze. Those fleeing residents, far slower than the unnatural frost, were halted in haunting poses as the wind bit into them. Limbs were suspended in mid-air positions. Eyes were left wide and unblinking. Mouths were cursed to forever gape in horror. "Run," Dad screamed, sprinting towards us from a nearby park bench. My brother, my childhood friend, and I were sitting in a sandbox. Already engrossed in a fantasy world, I wondered whether my imagination had conjured the wind. I thought my mind had transcended to a higher plane. It was my way of processing the trauma. However, I accepted the reality of the situation when my father shoehorned the three of us into his Volkswagen Golf. The icy jaws of the wind were nearly nipping at the rear of the vehicle as Dad twisted the key in the ignition, but the beat-up car rapidly lurched forwards. My father wrenched us away from the frost, seconds before it consumed us. "Daddy, where are we going?" I tearfully asked. "I don't know, Jillian," he weakly moaned, maneuvering around fleeing cars and pedestrians. "Are we picking up Mummy?" Alan asked. Dad ignored my brother's question. I was only 8 years old at the time, but I knew that my mother wasn't coming. I understood the significance of the tears in my father's eyes. For 26 years, I successfully managed to suppress that memory. Did such a good job, in fact, that I almost believed it had all been a dream. I started to believe that we had simply moved away from our hometown, and Mum had simply chosen to stay. Dad never convinced me otherwise. He never talked about what happened, neither did my brother. As for Leon, he moved to an orphanage in Anchorage. We wrote to each other for a couple of years, but his replies became less and less frequent. Eventually, he stopped responding entirely. I used to wonder why my father didn't adopt my childhood friend, but I suppose that would have forced him to accept what happened, and like me, he had no intention of doing that. I thought we would run back to England, having failed to achieve the American dream, but Dad kept us in Alaska. I assumed that he'd been driven by stubbornness, or guilt perhaps. We'd already fled our home. Perhaps fleeing across the pond would have been a step too far. Perhaps it would have felt like truly abandoning our mother. Whatever his reason for staying, Dad didn't tell anyone the truth. He never went to the police. He never returned to look for Mum. "Don't look back, kids," I remember him whispering as we fled the frost. I followed that advice for the next couple of decades, only recalling the event for the briefest moments from time to time. When Dad bought the first computer for our family in 2000, I googled the name of our old town. I typed the word before realizing I was even doing so. I was still young, of course, but I knew that nothing about our speedy departure had been normal. I wanted answers. I'd expected to discover that my village had become a ghost town. That would have made sense. Alaska's unforgiving climate breeds desolate places born to be abandoned. However, the search results revealed nothing, so I told myself I'd imagine the village. I told myself we'd always lived in Anchorage. As the years passed, I became comfortable with the notion that none of it had ever been real, not even my mother, and that was why I did not expect to see a certain person again. "Happy birthday, Jill." My jaw dropped when Leon Taylor appeared on my doorstep. It might seem strange that I would recognize a man who was a child when I last saw him, but Leon always had distinctive features. I immediately identified the mole on his neck, just below his facial scruff, and those sorrowful eyes shadowed by his unmistakable overgrown brows. "Leon," I gasped, "what are you doing here?" The man smiled weakly. "Sorry, Jill, I should have done this the millennial way, reconnected through Facebook." No, I just never thought I'd see you again. Do you want to come inside? I asked, motioning at the hallway. Leon nodded, so I made a couple of coffees whilst my old friend seated himself in the living room. A boy who I'd almost forgotten, almost entirely erased from existence, just like our old town. But I'd always known, just beneath the surface of my shallow memories, that it had all been real. The truth of my childhood was always within reach. As I brought the drinks into the lounge, hands trembling, I tried to dispel the thoughts flooding my mind. Thoughts of that awful day. How's your dad? How's Alan? Leon asked, taking the cup of coffee. I sighed. Dad's been unwell for a few years. He hasn't been taking care of himself and he's getting old. As for Alan, well, Alan's the way he's always been, uptight and distant, but... When was the last time you spoke to him? Leon sharply interjected. The question caught me off guard. Huh? Your brother. When was the last time you spoke to him? Leon asked. My face drained. He knows, I thought. How on earth does he know? 3 years ago, I answered. My old friend nodded. Did you fall out? I scoffed. That's an understatement. You remember what he was like when we were kids, don't you? Leon shrugged. He was 2 years older than us. We must have infuriated him. I nodded. Sure, but I grew up and he never did. We had a big argument and we haven't spoken since. Interesting, he responded. I raised an eyebrow. You're a man of few words these days, Leon. The man cleared his throat. Your brother messaged me a week ago. My other eyebrow raised. What? It was a very strange message. Did you reply? I asked. I thought you would have preferred to ignore it. He lowered his head in shame. I'm sorry, Jillian. I replied to some of your letters. Then you forgot about me, I said. It's embarrassing that I didn't get the hint. It wasn't embarrassing, Leon sheepishly muttered. I read all of them, every last letter. Oh, well, that's great, I laughed. Nice to know that you cared. Jillian, Leon paused, lifting his head. I was scared. Scared of what? I asked. Remembering that day, he replied. It's why I told your dad I didn't want to come and live with you. It's... What? I asked. Leon tilted his head. You didn't know? Did you really think he just dumped me in that place? He might have changed, but your dad was never cold. Still, I refused. Living with you would have reminded me of what happened to my family. I didn't reply, so my old friend prodded the beast. Aren't we going to talk about... why did my brother message you? I interrupted, avoiding the topic. Leon twitched his lips uncertainly, as if unwilling to part them. He told me that I had to see you. Leon trailed off. Right, I said. Why? Your brother said something insane, Jillian, he said. He claimed that Arnold Walker visited him in Fairbanks. My jaw fell. I beg your pardon, Arnold Walker, my brother's school friend. Leon nodded. He escaped. I didn't know others got out, I whispered. My old friend's face was growing paler. No, Your brother said something that seemed impossible. He said that Arnold did not arrive on his doorstep as a 36-year-old man, but a 10-year-old child. My stomach dropped. The natural response would have been to discredit such an outlandish story, refuting it with a rational explanation. But Leon's revelation served to do only one thing. It confirmed what I'd always known. A 10-year-old boy made it all the way from our hometown to Fairbanks, I asked meekly. Leon frowned. That's it? You're not going to question it? I did. I messaged Alan repeatedly, but he never replied. Not a nice feeling, is it? I asked, sighing. How did you want me to react, Leon? You were itching to talk about that day. Well, I'm not skirting around the subject now. Let's talk about it, okay? I know all of that horror really happened. I just never wanted anyone to confirm it. Me neither, Leon said. I was trying to avoid your family for the rest of my life. Your brother ruined that. Yeah, he tends to ruin things, I replied. So that's it? Alan wanted you to tell me about Arnold Walker? Leon shivered. There's more, but look, I know I should have messaged you about all of this first, but I thought about the way Alan avoided my questions. I didn't want you to do the same. I assumed if I were to show up in person, then I wouldn't be able to run away, I finished. I understand, Leon. I just hate that my brother is still too childish to talk to me. And funny, he called you childish too. Listening to you two bicker is nostalgic. Leon smiled before quickly adopting a solemn expression. I'm trying to change the subject, but I need to rip off the band-aid. Alan said that Arnold took him to a car on the front lawn. There was a man in the driver's seat, barely clinging to life, with a face mangled beyond recognition. Your brother said the man's skin had been peeled from his face, and he was still somehow alive. I shuddered, vomit climbing my throat. Arnold told your brother that the man was Mr. Johnson, Leon whispered. The farmer? The one who ran the local grocery store? I asked, shivering. My friend nodded. Yeah. Alan said he'd aged a little. Well, his hair was grayer than he remembered. The pair must have been on the road for hours, and your brother didn't know how they knew where to find him. He had so many questions for them, but Mr. Johnson died before the ambulance arrived, and whilst Alan talked to the paramedics, Arnold ran away. He's missing. Crap, I whispered. I'll call my brother. You might struggle, Leon said. Alan ended the message by saying that he was going back home. I gawped. Number, he wouldn't be that stupid. Maybe not. You should try to contact him, Leon said. He hasn't replied to my dozens of messages, but he might reply to you. Not sure he even has a signal out there in the boonies, but you're right, you should try. I spent an hour trying to contact my brother in various ways, but he did not respond. Alan had vanished, and I knew, like it or not, that I had to return to our village too. I should have told Dad, would have told him had he not been one bad day away from a heart attack. In spite of the man he'd become, I loved him. I didn't want to remind him of the place we'd fled. One person should be spared the horror of remembering, I thought. Leon and I, two strangers who'd spent formative years together, piled into my Kia, and we drove from Anchorage to a place that I'd long hoped had never really existed. I was going to be horribly disappointed. On a nondescript road that burrowed into the Alaskan wilderness, my throat started to twist and constrict. The outer edge of my vision shrank and my head pulsated with a slowing rhythm as the world slipped away from me. I struggled to breathe as I came to terms with an awful fact. I recognized that endless road. Jillian, Leon whispered. Don't, I begged. I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't ready. I'd known all along, of course, that our village existed, even when extensive research had revealed nothing about the town. When I thought of the way the breeze consumed the town, erasing its residents, it made sense that it would erase the very place itself. After all, even I'd started to doubt its existence, and I'd lived there. Accepting the unearthly nature of the event wasn't as tough as you might imagine. If anything, I had fought hard to deny it. I wanted to ignore the existence of a paranormal force, though I had witnessed it with my own eyes. Even if there were some Alaskan breeze powerful enough to instantaneously freeze an entire town, we hadn't witnessed that. We'd seen something else. We'd seen that glacial wind freeze the town, not its people, but its tether to time. After an hour of following the frosted landscape, we saw something familiar on the horizon. Leon's face mirrored mine as our wicked village appeared, a bulge of ruin and decay, growing as we neared it. And when we crossed the threshold into the desolate town, the reality of our quest finally dawned on me. Where is everybody? Leon asked. It might seem a moronic question to an outsider. Our old village was clearly an abandoned place. No rational person would expect anybody else to be there. Of course, I understood Leon. He had asked the same terrifying question that was circling the drain of my mind, refusing to flush away. I thought back to that terrible day on which hundreds of people froze in time. Then I thought of Arnold Walker and Mr. Johnson, the two residents who'd supposedly shown up at my brother's door. One of them had looked no older than he'd been in 1998. Time resumed. I finally mumbled, "Yes, but where did everybody go?" my childhood friend asked. I didn't have an answer, neither did my brother, and that was why he'd come here. That's not the real reason, I thought. He was hoping to find her. I rolled onto my old street, noting that the trees swayed in the wind and birds flew overhead, signs that time was flowing. I wondered whether others had fled in the same fashion as Arnold and Mr. Johnson. I even allowed my heart to soar a little as I considered that my mother might have freed herself, might have found Dad in Anchorage, might be wondering where Alan and I had gone. However, I knew that not to be the case. Mum had not arrived at my door, and there had been no national news coverage about people emerging from a town that didn't exist. There had only been an old, half-butchered man and a quiet boy. Both were gone, and I had questions about the nature of their escape from our hometown, given my brother's ominous message to Leon. Something was still dreadfully wrong with our village. 26 years had not changed that. The people of the village had not disappeared into the sunset. Whatever had happened to them, I knew it wasn't good, possibly worse than what happened to Arnold Walker and Mr. Johnson. I pulled onto the driveway of my childhood home, gently trundling over cracked asphalt. Weeds squirmed through the wounds of the suburb as nature sought to erase my childhood from existence. There was no need for that, of course. The wind of 1998 and whatever secrets it held had already done a fine job of wiping my hometown from reality. "Do you think he's come here?" Leon asked as I turned off the engine. "Yes, we both know who he wanted to find," I said. My childhood friend nodded, and we both somberly climbed out of the vehicle. The village was colder than I remembered. For a mid-afternoon day in late May, it was unseasonably chilly. Alaska, for the most part, is not the Arctic hellscape that many people imagine. Not in all parts of the state anyhow, and certainly not in late spring. The air also felt stale. It carried the stench of evil, and it seemed to be tinged with frost, as if that demonic breeze were still lingering lingering in the air, nearly 3 decades later. I knocked on the rotten front door, surprised that it did not break with a slight rap of my hand. "Alan," I yelled, "it's Jillian." My brother did not respond, but I wasn't concerned. If he had been there and Mum hadn't, then he wouldn't have wanted to stay. I wanted to use that as an excuse to turn around and leave. I already assumed that my mother wouldn't be there, but another part of me knew that my assumption was more of a wish. In a similar way, I had been secretly glad to find nobody in the town. There was only one person I hoped to find in my old village, and that was Alan. I was terrified by the prospect of finding anything else. "Jill," Leon started softly, "come on, we have to do it." "Do we?" I asked. "This was a mistake. We should turn around, we dash." "I agree," Leon sharply interjected, "but we have to find your brother, and when we do, we'll convince him to come back with us. We'll convince him to leave this place behind too." "Why did you come to see me, Leon?" I asked. "You could have ignored my brother's message. You could have pretended none of this had ever happened. That's what you did when you started ignoring my letters, isn't it?" "I deeply regretted that for years, Jill," he said softly. "You were my best friend. You were more than that. We were just kids, but I loved you. I have not made another connection like ours, not even in my adult life." "I know," I replied. "I loved you too, Leon. That's why it hurt when you let our bond peter out. If you'd cut me off from the start, I would have understood, but it just felt like you'd stopped caring." "Never. I just lost the strength to bear that trauma," he explained. "Every letter was a reminder, and that's why I came to your door. That's why I didn't ignore what your brother said. I didn't want something to happen to him. You lost your mother. I didn't want you to lose him too." "We all lost things," I sniffled. "You lost more than me. I just don't understand why you'd come back. Why my brother would come back. I don't even understand why I've come back." "We never really left this place, did we?" Leon asked. "Not in our minds. Even though it doesn't exist in the eyes of the outside world, it never left us. Never let go. Arnold Walker and Mr. Johnson lured Alan back. And he lured us back." "That's an unsettling way of looking at it," I timidly replied. "It's the only way I've been able to look at it," he said. "Whatever claimed this place, it remembered us, and it made sure we remembered it. Not that it would be easy to forget. For years I thought I'd lost my mind, but after talking to you and Alan, I'm not so sure. I find it hard to believe that we'd have experienced a shared delusion. No, it all really happened, and the memory replays in my mind every day. I'll never get rid of it." "Dad seemed to do a good job of erasing this place from his mind," I said. I knew that wasn't true, of course. He had never forgotten. That was made apparent by his deterioration. Alan and I had a close relationship with our father before we left that village. Afterwards he changed. We all changed. Losing Mum had fractured the family, but there was more to it than that. I started to consider that Leon might be right. Perhaps the frost hadn't ensnared the two of us, but it had certainly bitten us. "Do you want me to do it?" Leon eventually asked. I wanted to be courageous enough to open the door, but I wasn't. I nodded meekly and stepped aside, allowing my childhood friend the nightmarish task of facing whatever lay within my old home. He pushed the door handle down, expecting the house to be unlocked, but it wouldn't budge. "Shall we try the back?" I asked. Leon backed up. I quickly realized what he was planning to do, and I opened my mouth to utter a protest. My hulking friend had charged before I spoke a single word, however, and he hurled his body into the door. It quivered in its frame but did not give. "Leon," I cried, "what are you doing?" "Well, I don't suppose you have the key," he panted, massaging his shoulder. I held up my hands. "Look, let's just..." My friend rushed forwards again, and the result was the same. This time, however, Leon released a groan of pain, clutching his arm a little more tightly. "You're going to hurt yourself," I said. "Let's take it in turns to kick the door. That'll work better, and it won't cripple either of us." Leon nodded, and the two of us firmly booted the door near the handle. The wood quaked, and it only took a few attacks for the door to splinter around the lock. The frame splayed inwards, and the metal mechanism fell loose. "Whoops, that worked a little too well," Leon laughed. He led the way into my childhood home, which looked unlike the street outside, the same as I remembered, the same as it had looked on the day I left. There were no shoes left by the door, no muddy prints on the carpet, no indication whatsoever that my brother had visited our old home, which I'd gathered when the front door had been locked. But this was not a relief. I knew in my gut that Alan would have gone there first. He never made it home. Leon shivered. "This place feels cold." "Frozen," I corrected. "Frozen in time." "Is it safe for us to be here?" he asked. "What if we end up like the others?" It's a bit late to ask that now, I replied. The breeze passed long ago. This just seems to be the horror it left behind. Leon accepted my suggestion, then he wandered over to the staircase. My friend took one step before halting in place. For a haunting moment, I believed that he had been frozen in time too. I believed that I'd been wrong and the frost had come for us. But I quickly realized that my friend was still moving, still twitching. He was frozen by fear, not a supernatural gale. There's someone in the bathroom, Leon wheezed. With physical dread in every inch of my body, I joined my friend and looked up. Artificial light spilled beneath the bathroom door onto the dark landing. There might not be anyone in there, I shakily said. Jillian, this is an abandoned town. There is no electricity. Your house is still frozen in time, and it froze with the bathroom light left on. Somebody must have been... Don't say it, I pleaded, upper lip trembling. Do you want me to lead the way? He asked. I didn't. I wanted to run, but I knew I would never forgive myself for doing so. Leon was right, of course. I hadn't allowed him to finish his sentence, but it was clear that he was going to mention somebody in particular. Somebody whose face flooded my mind as we ascended the staircase, one tentative step at a time. Somebody whose name started to tickle my lips as Leon grasped the handle to the door. It wasn't locked. Mum, I moaned as Leon inched it open. My ageless mother was inside. I'm sure I would have screamed at whatever we found, but I was not prepared for the state of the statue before me. Mum was standing at the sink, hands cupped below a stream of tap water suspended in time. As I had always feared, the frost caught her. It was horrifying enough to be frozen in time for 26 years, whilst the rest of the world continued, but that wasn't why I screamed. I'd braced myself for that possibility. I'd spent my entire adult life coming to terms with it. I screamed because I wasn't prepared to see her face. Mum was smiling, not a wholesome smile. It was a taut grin that etched an unnerving crescent shape across her cheeks. There was nothing unnatural about the grin, but it looked painful, and it appeared as if cataracts had taken the entirety of her pupils. Mum, I asked weakly, do you hear me? There was no reply. I peered around the side of her face, and I immediately regretted it. Though she was frozen in time, she did not look unaware. I felt her sightless eyes boring into my face, and I quickly jumped backwards. Let's go and find your brother, Leon fearfully said. As I nodded, backing towards the doorway, I locked my gaze onto my mother's profile. My heart pounded as I started to close the bathroom door. I was trying to ignore the idea that had wormed into my mind. The possibility that, behind the glassy cataract, a pupil might still exist, lying dormant, watching me from a face that no longer seemed to belong to my mother. After I shut the door, Leon and I took a few moments to control our breathing. With a slight tremble, my friend finally walked over to the light switch and raised a hand, but I caught his wrist. What are you doing? He frowned. Leave the light on, I whispered. I don't like the idea of leaving her in the dark. My friend's expression softened, and he nodded, seeming to understand my explanation, seeming to empathize, but I was lying. I wasn't worried about leaving my mother in the dark. I was worried about the thing behind that smiling face. Alan didn't come here, I said. Did he really come back? You read the message, Jillian, Leon replied. I know, but... I sighed. I know. He might not have come to the house, my friend suggested. This is the first place he would have visited, I said. If Mum weren't here, he wouldn't have returned. Well, let's look around, Leon urged. You never know. We might find something else. Something to help your mother, perhaps. You saw her face, I whispered. She looked far past help. Don't say that, Jillian, Leon shouted, eyes watering. You idiot, I thought. I was so self-centered, so focused on finding my brother and my mother. I hadn't thought about Leon's parents, his brother Carl, people we left behind when my father saved us. I remembered Leon sobbing as he begged my father to turn around. I'm sorry, I said. We need to find your family too. Leon viciously shook his head. Only if we find an answer, Jill. Only if we find a way to save them. My friend entered my childhood bedroom and I followed him. I imagine that visiting one's childhood home is a strange experience for anyone, but strangeness morphs into horror when that home is trapped in a moment of time. I felt physically unwell when I saw the glass of water on the bedside table, fresh as it had been on the day that my dad took us to the park. Life had continued for me, but the town was still trapped in that dreadful, inexplicable day. Jillian, Leon said calmly, there are people outside. He was standing in front of my bedroom window, and when I joined him, eyeing the road below, I saw them. A man and a woman who seemed to be in their mid-40s. The man wore ill-fitting clothes, a checkered shirt 2 sizes too small, and a pair of torn jeans. The woman, on the other hand, wore a pristine, shapely dress with a floral pattern. She looked oddly familiar, though her eyes were jittery and unfocused. It was the man who'd locked his eyes onto our house. I vaguely recognize her, Leon said. I nodded. Yeah, I don't know her name, but I remember her. She looks a tad older perhaps. I don't know the man though. You stay here, Leon said, reaching inside his coat. Don't come out. What are you holding? I frowned, noting his shiftiness. Just, Leon concealed his hand within the thick, wintry coat. Are you going to stay in here? My eyes grew as I spotted a glint of metal. You don't, no Leon, please, don't tell me you have what I think you have. We had no idea what we were going to find here, the man protested. I scoffed. Leon Taylor, carrying a gun, the boy who berated me for killing me a spider. Before he replied, there came the sound of the front door swinging open, and when we spun our heads back to the bedroom window, we saw that the man and woman were no longer on the street. I realized they were inside. Hello, called a man from downstairs. We mean you no harm. I have a weapon, Leon yelled, slipping the pistol out of a hidden holster. Don't shoot. It's Bernie Bradley, the man shouted weakly. My mouth gaped. Bernie Bradley was in my brother's school year. I remembered him, and as I recalled the face of the man I'd seen on the street, I didn't find it hard to believe it had been the face of that same boy, 26 years into the future. What do you want? I yelled. To help you, he replied, before they come. Who? Leon asked. I'll tell you if you put that weapon away, Bernie said. I don't trust you enough for that, my friend growled. Are you Leon Taylor? The man asked. Why? Leon responded. Sydney Manley pushed you off the swing set and you called her a fat cow, Bernie said. She ran home in tears. It wasn't enough. In a place like that, which defied all laws of rationality, it wasn't enough for Bernie Bradley to know that, but Leon and I needed it to be enough because we were hopelessly alone, hopelessly afraid, and hopelessly desperate. My friend reholstered his weapon and we walked onto the landing. Bernie and the woman were midway up the stairs. The man's hands were raised, but the woman barely seemed aware of where they were, barely seemed aware of herself. Leon Taylor and Jillian Maynard, is that right? Bernie asked. How did you recognize us? I asked. You were the only ones who escaped, he replied, the Maynards and Leon Taylor. The only ones? Leon asked incredulously. Bernie nodded. Others tried, but the frost got them. So why aren't you? I started, unable to finish. Mind if we sit down before I answer that? He asked. I looked at Leon and my friend begrudgingly nodded. We all headed to the living room and sat down. Once we did, Bernie Bradley told us an incredible story, and the woman beside him simply rocked on the sofa, face painted with a disturbing smile. Bernie had been a 10-year-old boy, sitting at his bedroom desk when the chill swept through his room. He told us that he remembered nothing but a black void. He might have been there for an eternity, or it might have been less than a moment. When he woke from that dark slumber, still a 10-year-old boy sitting in the desk chair, Bernie looked out of the bedroom window. He was overcome by the horrible feeling that time had been lost, but he didn't know how much. And when he saw residents frozen in the street, he realized that something awful had happened. Bernie found his own paused parents in the kitchen, and they were completely unresponsive to his pleas. The lonely, frightened boy ran through the town, calling for help. Nobody answered. After a long day of searching, he returned to his house in tears. For a week, Bernie lived on cans of food from the cupboards, and then he heard shouting from the street. Hello, is anybody there? A man called. Bernie ran outside to find Mr. Johnson. The farmer had just woken from a darkness to find the town full of statues. Bernie told Mr. Johnson that he'd been alone for a week, but he had no idea how long he'd been frozen before that. The boy wanted to leave, but the farmer said they had to save as many people as possible. They had a duty to do so. After all, neither the farmer nor the boy knew what might happen to them if they were to run. The frost might return. Anyway, Mr. Johnson took Bernie under his wing. The crops in his field thankfully had unfrozen, as had his entire farmhouse. Mr. Johnson fed Bernie, and the two of them survived. A week later, they found Elizabeth Coulter, the local head teacher, wandering through the town. Over the course of the following year, a dozen more unfrozen souls were saved and brought back to Mr. Johnson's farm. But things changed as time passed. The newer thawed souls were unhinged. The longer a person had been trapped in that black stasis, the less human they became. They were still intelligible, but they spoke only of the voice in the void void, a voice that they missed in the land of the living. They were irritable, but Mr. Johnson cared for them all the same. Eventually they fled. This only worsened as the years went by. After a decade, Bernie's mother and father unfroze. However, his dad ran and his mom only remained because she was lost and confused. She would rant and rave about the speaker, the one that would make everything better, the one that would make them all eternal. It was during the year of 2018 that things crossed a terrifying line. Mr. Johnson had decided that newcomers were not welcome. It was a decision of necessity, not cruelty. The recently unfrozen folk had become more than unintelligible. They had become dangerous. "Hark, the speaker calls," Walter Frankton screamed. The middle-aged man who had once been a police officer was standing outside Mr. Johnson's farmhouse. When the community of sane people emerged, they screeched at the sight of Walter holding a charred body above his head. Nobody identified the burnt corpse, but Mr. Johnson wasted no time in drawing his rifle and giving Mr. Frankton 10 seconds to flee. Bernie explained that Walter laughed demonically before disappearing into the night. Over the coming years, bodies were found in the street. Followers of the speaker would relentlessly pursue Mr. Johnson's community, so the sane folk kept distant from the people of the speaker. Few of Mr. Johnson's followers understood why they stayed, yet nobody felt able to leave. Something was keeping them there. A couple of weeks before Leon and I arrived, however, Bernie said that Mr. Johnson finally announced his plan to leave. There were murmurs of uncertainty. Everybody wanted to escape, of course, but fear had always stopped them. Still, they trusted Mr. Johnson. If anybody had the power to safely lead them away from the place controlling their minds, it had to be the brave farmer. Packing and preparations began. However, some days later, Bernie Bradley happened to look out of an upstairs window and noticed Mr. Johnson. The old man was wandering aimlessly onto the driveway, stumbling like a drunken man towards his vehicle. Bernie said there was a small child standing beside the car. The young boy led Mr. Johnson to the driver's door with a smile, and the two of them fled. Things disintegrated after that. When a Molotov cocktail found its way through a window, the community dispersed. The sane folk fled in different directions, and Bernie was left alone with his mother. "We've been running for days," Bernie explained. "I keep finding the bodies of people from my community, charred corpses in the street. I tried to leave this town, but it wouldn't let me. The farther I drove, the sharper the pang in my heart. I knew I'd die if I were to keep going." "How did you find us?" Leon asked. "I heard you," Bernie replied. "Hard to miss the sound of an engine in a dead place like this. I had a hunch that it might be you." "You must have heard my brother then?" I asked hopefully. Bernie frowned. "Alan's here? That might explain the raucous a few days ago. I don't know what I heard. Noise. Lots of it. You won't find him, Jill. You have to run whilst it still lets you. The frost might be gone, but something lingers." "The speaker?" Leon asked. Bernie nodded. "I was fortunate enough to never hear it, or never remember hearing it. I don't know what it said to them. My mother won't tell me." Bernie looked at the woman next to him, the one who appeared to be the same age as him, though I realized he was still a decade younger. The horror of our town had aged him beyond his years. "It will be so glorious." Bernie's mother giggled, eyes bearing faint pupils behind mild cataracts. "You're lucky that they didn't see you arrive," Bernie said. "Otherwise, you'd be dead already, but they'll come sooner or later, and you need to listen to me if you want a safe way out of here, okay? We need to distract them, keep them off your backs." I shook my head. "I need to find my brother. I know he came to this town. I thought I'd find him in our home, but..." "Walter wanted him," Bernie's mother hissed. The woman stopped rocking, stopped smiling, and her head snapped to face me with such eerie speed that I thought it might entirely disconnect from her neck. Bernie quivered, seemingly just as horrified by his mother's words as the rest of us. "Mother?" he asked. "Walter wanted him. Walter wanted him. Walter wanted him." The woman laughed, taunting me. "What does she mean?" I sobbed. "Does Walter Frankton have my brother?" Bernie's face whitened. "If he does, your brother's either been flayed or charred." "Christ, Bernie," Leon replied. I sniffled. "I won't leave until I know." "He's already dead," Bernie bluntly said. "We don't know that," I cried. I thought the others were sitting in stunned silence because I'd spoken so assertively. However, as I calmed my breathing and the throbbing sensation in my ears quietened, I heard it too. The sound of laughing voices. Bernie's mother strained to smile broadly. She looked as pained as my mother, but grateful for the privilege of the discomfort. "You don't want to see this. We'll head through the back. Do not look at the street." Bernie hoarsely pleaded as I rose. but I was already running to the door. I flung it open and started to run down the path, with Leon and Bernie in tow. Then my eyes met the mob spilling beyond the end of the street. The crowd easily numbered 100 people, and each face wore a terrible smile, eyes glassy yet all-seeing. There was a man shuffling from the crowd towards me like a terrified toddler taking its first steps. I tried to blot his face from my mind. I didn't want to see it, though it was too late for that. I'd seen everything the moment I faced the crowd. Eventually I fell to my knees and howled as I embraced the truth. The shuffling man who had been flayed alive was my brother. Alan reached towards me with an outstretched hand, weakly shouting something before toppling forwards. He was reduced to a motionless heap on the road. "Jill," Leon cried again, rushing to me. "We have to go." I continued to wail as the gleeful crowd surged forwards. I resisted Leon, but he easily hauled my limp body to the car and bundled me into the back. "He needs help," I blubbered. "He's gone, Jill," Leon whispered. "What about your family?" I asked. "They're all gone," he sniffled, stepping on the accelerator. Staring through the rearview window, I watched the crowd approach my old home. Bernie stood on the front porch, and his mother had her hands on his shoulders. The man did not run. As we pulled off the driveway, it almost seemed as if he, too, finally had a smile on his face. The mob swarmed Bernie, and I heard a brief cry of agony. It may have been ecstatic or fearful. It may have been both. After we crossed the border, no chill pierced us. We were free to leave, but I know Leon and I belonged to that town. I have always suspected that the wind grazed its teeth against my skin when I was a child. It grazed all of us. For even now, I still feel that link, that urge to return to the salivating mob with a smile on my face. When I returned home to find that my father was missing, I knew he felt it too. On November 20th, 2018, Clark County Fire Department personnel responded to a blaze at a remote location in the Mojave Desert. Upon arrival, they noted that the burning building was an abandoned train depot. Once the fire was contained, they noted several irregularities in the ashes. Although the fire had destroyed the building far beyond any hope of repair, hundreds of personal items scattered across the floor were undamaged. These items included purses, glasses, personal identification cards, dog collars, laptops, cell phones, coats, jackets, pagers, backpacks, hygiene supplies, hats, tools, and much more. The items spanned multiple decades in terms of manufacturing date. Some of the items were tools and implements dating back centuries. No items could be linked to the others. Approximately 350 human bones were discovered under the floor, arranged in what law enforcement later described as a ritualistic array. Chief among these irregularities was a large skeleton that exhibited what the coroner described as unnatural proportions. One redacted report suggests that the skeleton possessed structures similar to wings. The most surprising discovery, however, was a middle-aged man weeping among the ruins. He introduced himself as David and apologized for burning the depot down. "It didn't have to be done," he allegedly stated, "but I still had to do it." He was detained and arrested for suspicion of arson and homicide. The homicide charges were later dropped when testing indicated that the human bones were a minimum of 300 years old. The arson charges were successful. Based on the details of his testimony and his clearly unstable mental state, however, the suspect was sentenced to a secure mental health facility where he spent 4 years before undercover personnel discovered him, at which point he was transferred to AHHNASCU. Shortly after incarceration, the inmate submitted to various assessments and field tests. The findings were unusual even by agency standards. In simplest terms, David seemingly possesses the ability to locate the souls of deceased individuals, at which point he is compelled to hear their final statements, which David understandably refers to as confessions, while escorting them to what he calls the other side. These duties were, and remain, psychologically distressing. Immediately prior to burning the depot down, David states that he failed to transport a passenger. The details of this failure remain unknown. David did not discuss them at any point during the interview recorded below. At this time, the agency plans to implement ongoing treatment with the goal of identifying and hopefully rectifying the details of this failure. Administration hopes to evaluate and, if appropriate, commission David as a T-class agent upon completion of his treatment. Prior to his arrest, David's mode of conveyance for these trips was his truck. David presents as a Caucasian male between the ages of 60 to 65. He is approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, with dark hair and brown eyes. David's diagnoses include depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and severe insomnia. It should be noted that the site of David's Depot bore signs of ritualistic use dating back approximately 500 years. The site is currently under quarantine. It should also be noted that inmate 17 has expressed repeated interest in David. Finally, the interviewers would like to note that David has expressed a desire to change his title to something less ominous, such as the ferryman. Interview subject: the Pale Horseman. Classification string: non-cooperative / destructible / Gaian / constant / low / Phalos. Interviewers: Rachele B. and Christoph W. Interview date: December 19th, 2024. One night I woke up and really needed to talk to my dad. Of course I couldn't because he died about a month before. I paid for the funeral. It was so small and so cheap it was basically an insult to his memory, and it still ate most of my savings. I didn't regret it. I was just ashamed I couldn't afford to give him something better. Still am. Arranging the burial kept my mind busy. When you're busy enough, nothing really has the opportunity to sink in. But the night I woke up needing to talk to my dad was when it sank in that he was really gone. I got out of bed and went for a drive. Drives were something my dad and I used to do. Probably the only actual bonding time we ever had. It was hard for us to talk to each other, or to anyone really. We were both human dams. But something about those drives broke. The dams broke down. We had to actually be driving though. For some reason we said a word till after the wheels were moving. Night drives were the best somehow. We never even looked at each other but talked all the way to the other end of the highway and back. He'd always play music from when he was a kid. Sometimes he'd stop at the gas station for sodas and candy. Once in a while, he'd pull into the all-night diner and buy me breakfast for late dinner. Mostly we didn't stop at all. We just drove. But it didn't matter where we did or didn't stop. All that mattered was I got to go for a drive with my dad. The night I needed to talk to him but couldn't, I went for a drive. Partly because I missed him, partly because I wanted to be able to cry privately. Me crying always freaked both Amber and Devin out, and she didn't need any extra stress. But mostly because when it comes right down to it, solo driving is the most soothing thing I've ever done. Night driving particularly. Night driving in the desert especially. The moon-silvered landscape is this patchwork of contrasts. All shadow and silver, dim light and dark so deep it makes that dimness look bright. There's an inhuman, almost primal peace I find when I'm out there. It's liberating and eerie and beautiful all at once to be alone on the road at night. An exercise in isolation. Isolation can be hard, but it's the only time I feel comfortable being myself. So the isolation has always been a draw. So is the desolation. The desolation of the desert is impersonal and gentle. Sometimes that's exactly what you need. A reminder that you're less than the blink of an eye, that everything you feel and everything you've done won't even be remembered. That sounds bitter, but it's not. At least not to me. In fact, that's the only time I get safe enough to actually feel the things that make me hurt. On that night and on that drive, I was remembering the night before my dad went to the hospital for the last time. He was still himself, but his mind was not exactly slipping, but traveling, flitting back and forth between childhood and adulthood, and staying back more often than not. That night especially, it was kind of like he was a little boy again. He was scared of the dark and started crying, so I got in bed with him the way I used to when my kid had nightmares. He snuggled in just like Devin used to and started talking about his life. Things I never knew, things I never even thought to ask. God, that was hard, knowing there was so much he never told me, so much I'll never know. He got to talking about his mom. I asked him a question, I don't even remember what, and he sat up hopefully, asking if his mama was there. No, Dad, I said gently. Is she coming? The hope in his voice broke me. Remembering his as I drove along the road that night broke me all over again. The desert glided past as I cried, shadows and darkness all covered in a thin film of silver moon. That landscape reminded me of my heart, a bottomless dark pit filmed over with whatever light I could muster for my family's sake. At some point, I noticed the road was different. I know that road. I know every bump and shimmy. You know how desert highways can be. Rippled, warped, cracked. I knew the stretch of road I was on was so broken up it sometimes felt like a monster was reaching up from under the asphalt and jerking your wheels around for the fun of it. It had always been that way. I figured it would always be that way. But that night, that stretch of road was so smooth it felt like my wheels weren't even touching the ground. Like my truck was gliding on air. That's when I saw the hitchhiker. I don't pick up hitchhikers. Not because I expect anything bad to happen. I really don't. I've found that it's easier to trust everyone until they give me a reason not to. And hitchhikers are no exception. The only reason I didn't pick them up is because I had a family and they needed me. I couldn't take the risk, even a small one, for their sakes. But this guy, I had to pick him up because in silhouette at least, he reminded me of my dad. I'm not big on fate or mysticism, not at all, but I do believe in human connection. I think everything on Earth is more deeply connected than any of us know or even want to acknowledge, and denying that connection is the root of a lot of problems. I guess that actually sounds pretty mystical, but why was I even on the road, right? I woke up missing my dad and went for a drive specifically to cry for him where no one would have to see. On this drive, I just happened to see a guy in need who looks like my dad asking for help. What are the chances? Zero. Those chances are zero. It felt like one of those connections, so I pulled over. The hitchhiker climbed in as coyotes howled nearby, pleasantly eerie. The desert outside looked darker and brighter than ever. Up close, the guy looked so much like my dad that it made me choke up. I managed to ask, "Where you headed?" "We'll know when we see it." It was my dad's voice. Chills exploded. For a second, I thought I was going to scream. Instead, I flicked on the cab light, but the hitchhiker flicked it right back off. "David," he said, "I need you to hear everything I never told you." Dad, I remembered the way he'd said mama on his last night at home. That's what my voice reminded me of. "Where's my mama? Is she here? Mama, are you here? Daddy, are you here?" He didn't answer, but of course he didn't. He couldn't because the wheels weren't moving yet. I put the truck in gear and started driving on that road so smooth it felt like my wheels were touching nothing but air. Once we were at speed, my dad started talking. "I loved my mom," he said. "She did so much for me, more than I could ever do for her. I did everything I could. I went hunting out in the hills for food, set traps and checked them every day with my old hound dog. I miss him." He wiped his eyes. "But my mom, my mama, I helped her clean and make dinner, tried to do all my chores without being asked. She was the best, David, just the best. I'd give so much for you to know her. She'd have loved you. I think she would have showed me how to love you better than I did. Reminded me that it's not weak to love well, that not loving well is the weakness. I adored her, David. I wanted to grow up be like her." He sighed. "Instead, I grew up to be like my dad. That's not bad. He wasn't a bad man. He just was how he was, just like me. You'll know how he was because you know how I was. Always telling you how you did this or that or said that wrong. I did that because I saw what he did to me. And you know, it taught me to apply myself. Taught me to learn fast, to do everything on my own, to hold everything together even when I didn't know how to hold myself together. I saw what that did to him. I recognized that it did the same to me, and I know it's the same for you. I'm sorry." He wiped his eyes again. "I wasn't sure I wanted children, but back then you didn't really get a say. It was just what you did, so I did it. But I was worried, David. I was scared, but I couldn't admit that. My dad taught me not to get scared, but even though I couldn't admit it, I was scared right up till the second you were born. And when I saw you, the most beautiful baby boy that ever was, I was still scared, but I was so happy. When I held you, the world got brighter than bright. I promised you and myself that I'd give you the whole bright world, that I'd be as good a dad to you as my mama was to me. I wanted to. David, I wanted to more than I ever wanted anything, but I couldn't figure out how. I wanted to speak so badly. I felt my dam coming down, but it was still holding, and my dad's was broken in a way nothing had ever been broken. So I kept my mouth shut. I couldn't even say I love you when you started getting bigger, not because I didn't. I did, I do, more than I ever showed and more than you'll ever know. I was just so afraid I'd say it wrong. I was afraid I was doing everything wrong. I started believing I was doing everything wrong. I started feeling you'd be better off if I wasn't too involved, the way I'd have probably been better off if my own dad hadn't been too involved. I didn't think it, not like that, I just felt it. To be as good a dad as my mom was a mom took something I didn't have, something I didn't know how to get. You know how I was, David. You know if I couldn't figure out how to do something in 2 minutes flat, then I just didn't learn. That's the worst thing I ever did. I wanted to tell you, I wanted to be that for you. I never was, and now I never will be, but I love you, and I wish I'd known how to make every minute of every day be as good as our night drives. Here's my stop, getting out here. He pointed to this little train depot just off the highway. It was tiny, lights spilled from the windows, so bright the building looked like it was suspended in a tiny sun. I pulled over, he patted my shoulder and said, "Thank you for hearing." Then he got out and walked across the sand to the depot. When the door swung shut behind him, the lights went out. I sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel for dear life while I sobbed. Then I headed home. About 10 minutes into the drive, my wheels start grinding on the asphalt again. When I got home, Amber was awake and she was a wreck. She wasn't doing well, she never really had, but it got really bad after her sister passed and never got better. It took me hours to calm her her down, she kept repeating, "I thought you left me." I told her what I always did, "I'll never leave you." Our son Devin was waiting in the kitchen after she finally fell asleep. "I hate her," he said, "or at least what she's become. And you're not any better, you never were." He took off before I could say a word. I didn't try to stop him, not because I didn't want to, just because I didn't know how. I didn't really get the chance to process what happened that night, but I don't think it would have made a difference. Definitely wouldn't have changed the fact that I didn't know what I thought about it. In the end, I wrote it off as a trick of grief. You know, near-death experiences supposedly only manifest to ease the distress of passing. I figured my experience with my dad manifested to soothe the distress of grief. Until a couple weeks later, when I woke up in the middle of the night needing to talk to dad again. I can't describe the excitement or the hope. Hope that everything I ever believed about connection and interconnectedness was real. That my dad and I finally had the connection we always wanted but couldn't forge. A connection strong enough to bypass or even wormhole through death itself. I got in my truck and went for a drive. About halfway down that buckled, broken highway, the asphalt smoothed out and it felt like my wheels weren't touching the ground. And a couple minutes later, I saw a hitchhiker. My heart kind of swelled and I felt this big smile spread over my face as I imagined another night drive with my dad. But this hitchhiker wasn't my dad, it was a woman. I thought about my grandma, I even thought about Amber's sister. I pulled over, she got inside. I didn't know her, but she seemed to know me. "Mom," she said, "I need you to hear everything I never told you." I frowned, but started to drive. "I took care of Roxy, just like you told me to. I really did, but I also really didn't do it right." I felt a sick swoop in my stomach, but didn't say anything. That's one of the rules of night driving, you don't interrupt. I wasn't cruel to her, wasn't mean, didn't neglect her, I would never, not ever, I took care of her, but I didn't love her. I didn't love her because I was jealous of her. How ridiculous is that, being jealous of a dog? She sniffed and wiped her eyes. "I was jealous because of how much you loved her. And Mom, I get it, dogs are dogs, and Roxy was really great even for a dog, but she was still just a dog, and you bought her more clothes than you ever bought me. You put more effort into her treats and prescription food than you ever did for me. You used to feed me stuff that made me sick. I know it was because you couldn't afford anything else, but you still spent more on her. You took her to the vet more than you ever took me to the doctor, and it's not like you knew, but not going to the doctor is how I ended up here at 44 years old. But none of that even matters. What matters is you gave the dog all the love you didn't want to give me, and I get why, I do. Roxy is Roxy, and I'm me." Her face crumpled and she wiped her eyes again. I tried to overcome those feelings because they were so ugly and so stupid. Who gets jealous of a dog, especially such a good one? People like me, I guess. I tried to overcome it. I tried to kill the jealousy, but I couldn't. And you know what? That dog loved me anyway. As much as she loved you, as much as I loved you. Hell, sometimes I think she loved me more. Why do children and dogs have to love as deeply as they do? I always wondered that. It's not fair. It's not fair. She released a shaky breath. You know, Roxy wasn't allowed to sleep on my bed. That was a big no-no and she knew it, but sometimes I'd wake up crying or I'd have a panic attack, and she'd jump up and nuzzle me until I calmed down. Then I'd put her back on the floor. She uttered a sob. Why did I do that? Why? All she wanted was for me to love her back, and she was so easy to love too. I still couldn't do it. She died on a Tuesday morning before work. It was winter. She didn't want to get up. I thought she just didn't want to go outside because of the snow, so I forced her. But she wasn't being a brat. She was in heart failure and the stress of walking in the snow. Oh my god, Mom. She crawled into my lap and died there. If I hadn't made her go outside, she wouldn't have died like that. Not in the lap of someone who never let her on the bed unless they got something out of it. She laughed, then sobbed again. If someone gave me the choice, I would burn in hell for an eternity of eternities if it meant I could go back to give her the life she deserved from me. Sometimes I wonder if you ever felt the same way about me, Mom. I don't know what would be worse. If you didn't, or if you did. Here's my stop. Let me out here. Thank you for hearing. Just off the highway, the train depot shimmered into bright, blinding being. The lady got out and trudged across the sand. Maybe it was wishful thinking, but when the door swung open, I saw the silhouette of a little dog in the doorway, tail wagging a million miles a minute. When I got home, it was almost dawn and Devin was having a breakdown in the front yard. Amber was trying to calm him down. When I pulled up, she ran over and started raging at me about everything and nothing. I sent her inside to rest and took over. Devin was coming down off something and I could tell it was a rough landing. It happened a lot, every couple months at least. It used to make me angry, but I didn't have it in me to be angry anymore. Even if that wasn't strictly true, my anger only ever made things worse. Both both Devin and Amber had plenty to be angry about without me adding to it, so I shut the anger down and sat on the grass with him. Devin started talking. I tried to listen, but it was hard. My mind was going as fast as that little dog's tail, 1,000,000 miles an hour, only these weren't happy miles. All I could think is how pointless it all was, how this life was all I had and all my kid would ever have if he was lucky. Not for the first time, I felt like I'd cursed my kid. In a good month, I could afford to give him half of what he needed and none of what he deserved. What kind of life is that? How crappy is it to love someone so much that you'd kill or die to make them happy, but to never have the chance to do either? This is all he gets, I thought. This is all any of us get. What's the point? A few nights later, I again woke up needing to talk to my dad. I got in the truck and drove along that rutted, broken highway until it turned so smooth it felt like my wheels were running along the air. A few minutes later, I saw an impossibly small hitchhiker waiting on the side of the road. I pulled over. This tiny little boy climbed in. He looked so sick and he was so small I had to help him. "Daddy," he said, "I need you to hear everything I never told you." I started driving. I wanted to meet my baby sister. I tried to hold on to see her just like you asked. I tried to be strong, but I wasn't. "I'm sorry I couldn't hold on anymore. I was too tired, Daddy. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I kept making you and Mommy cry." His lip trembled. He looked out the window at the wide pale moon and the silver dark desert. "Are you going to forget me, since you have a new baby now?" I started crying too. "Please don't forget me. I won't ever forget you. I won't forget Mommy singing to me and holding my hands when I was in the hospital. I won't forget when you were crying in the garage. I was scared because you never cry, but then you hugged me and said I was brave, and you were only crying because you were happy I was so brave. I won't forget that, Daddy. I'm sorry I made you cry all the time. I'm glad you'll have a new baby to make you smile. Just don't forget me when you smile. And please don't cry when you remember me. Please just smile. I think I need to get out here. Thank you for hearing." The depot shimmered just off the highway, brighter and soft. "Can you walk with me, Daddy? I know you can't go in, but I'm scared of the dark." I got out first, then helped him down onto the ground. He squeezed my hand as we walked across the sand. "Is it going to hurt?" "No," I said, "I promise." When we reached the door, he looked up at me, beaming. He didn't look sick anymore. "Thank you, I won't forget you, don't forget me." The door swung shut behind him and the lights went out. There was such pressure in my chest, heavy and painful, expanding at the speed of light. It felt like it was going to crush me and make me explode at the same time. I opened the depot door. It was dark inside and empty except for spiders. I went back to my truck and drove home. The road stayed smooth for hours. For so long I started getting scared. My wheels didn't touch asphalt again until dawn. It felt like a warning, so I decided no matter what that I would never touch the depot door again. This arrangement, if that's what you want to call it, continued for a while. Maybe once a week I'd wake up needing to talk to my dad. I'd get up and go for my night drive in the desert, trundling down the jagged highway that was so broken it felt like a monster was reaching up to mess with my axles right up to the second the road turned smoother than air. A couple minutes later, I always found a hitchhiker. They were all sad, even the happy ones. That was hard. Being whoever they needed to talk to was harder. None of those people ever knew they were talking to an old fat truck driver named David. They thought they were talking to their dads or moms or grandparents or spouses or lovers or friends or siblings or enemies or kids. Most of them were relieved to see the depot come shimmering into view. A few were anxious. One was terrified. He was disgusting. From the second I saw his silhouette on the side of the highway, everything in me started screaming. For the first time, I thought about driving on past and leaving him in the dust. I almost did, but then I remembered that morning where my wheels just wouldn't touch the ground again. So I stopped and he climbed in. He was too human and too inhuman at the same time. And what he told me, I've never even imagined someone could think those things, let alone say them, let alone do them. But he had. And he wasn't sorry. He was glad. He was gleeful. When he saw my disgust, he laughed. "What did I tell you, Kate? I'm more than human, and I'm less. This is my stop. Thank you for hearing." The depot was there, but the windows dark. When we pulled up, his eyes went dark too. He looked at me. Instead of glee, I saw terror. "I can't go in there," he said. "I won't." Before I could stop him, not that I had any idea how I would, he jumped out and bolted out across the desert. The full moon cast a wild, awful shadow behind him. As I pulled away, I saw the depot door opening. Something slithered out, something something huge and just as awful as him, and took off into the desert chasing him and his hideous shadow. When I got home, there was an ambulance in my driveway. Paramedics were wheeling Devin out on a stretcher. Amber was sobbing. Before I even got out of the car, I was sobbing too. I tried to hug her, but she threw me off. Devin died that night. I didn't sleep for weeks. There was no one I felt like I needed to talk to for weeks. I'm not sure I felt anything. I think I just wanted to die. The first dead, dreamless sleep I had happened 5 weeks after he died. It lasted 2 hours. Then I woke up needing to talk to him. I was already crying by the time I reached my truck. I drove out onto the highway under the moon, through the silver darkness and the howling coyotes. Their songs sounded like what was inside my heart. The broken road knitted itself, turning so smooth it felt like there was no road at all, only air. And then there he was, my boy, standing on the side of the road waiting for me. I pulled over. Rage, grief, and joy rushed through me, none stronger than the other. Devin got into the truck, scared and wide-eyed. I put the truck in gear and we started driving. I need you to hear everything I never told you, he said, and something inside me broke. A dam, but the wrong dam. Before my son could open his mouth again, I broke apart and started raging at him. Years and years of things that had built up behind the dam. Years and years of things I never told him. But not all of the things I never told him. Only part of them, and only the bad part. He didn't say a word. I raged until we reached the depot, all blazing bright and gold. He opened the door before I even pulled over. Too late, I realized what I'd done. I reached for him, but he shoved me away and ran. I got out and chased after him, but I was slow and he was fast, and before I made it halfway, he vanished inside the depot and the lights went out. I stood outside shrieking and begging him to come back out. He didn't. After a long time, I went back to my truck. I was scared I'd never find my way back home after that, but my wheels touched the road almost immediately. When I got home, Amber was gone. I didn't get a passenger for months. I barely slept and woke up 10 times a night when I did, but I never woke up needing to talk to anybody. I never felt any connection. I never felt any hope. It started again about a year later and went along a regular clip right up until I screwed up, just like I screwed up everything else. But until then it was good. I did what I was supposed to. I picked them up. They told me the things they never told anyone else. I listened and delivered them to their destination, ferried them to the last stop before their final destination. The depot was almost always bright. I'm not sure why I care anymore, but I'm glad it was bright. I'm so glad that for most of us, the end is soft and golden light.
If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Let me know your thoughts of these stories in the comments below. I frequently talk to my viewers there. But anyways, I hope you were creeped out.
Just kidding. Stay safe.